In this episode of the Locked On NBA Big Board podcast, it is another difficult evaluations episode. I wrote an article last week about some players that I've had a hard time evaluating, whether it be due to lack of athleticism or how their game scales up. And in this episode, Leif Tuling is going to share why Ace Bailey is a difficult eval for him. Now, I have no concerns about Ace Bailey. He is number 3 on my board, but Leif has some concerns. Find out what they are. Big shout out to each and every person that has made the Locked On NBA Big Board podcast your first listen of the day. I am your host, Rafael Barlow, along with my co-host, Leif Tuling, the man that watches more college basketball than anyone else. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Also, if you are a big fan of the NBA, now that the trade deadline is over, now that your team is either deciding that they want to be contenders or they are all in on the draft, you must check out the Locked On newsletter at lockedondaily.com. It is a one-stop for ultimate team and league coverage delivered right to your inbox every day. And also, if you are not subscribed to the Locked On NBA Big Board YouTube channel, I'm not sure what's taking so long. Please subscribe, like, share, comment, click the bell so you can be notified every time we drop an episode, because we're coming at you 5 days a week with awesome draft takes. I'm a little biased, but awesome draft takes. I stand on that. And in this episode, Leif is going to get some takes off of his chest about Ace Bailey. James and I, we've had multiple debates about Ace. I've said Ace is the number 3 pick in the 2025 draft. James has been like, no, not so fast. And it sounds like Leif is in the not so fast category. Tell me your thoughts on Ace Bailey and why he is a difficult eval for you.
So, yeah, I think it's important to preface that he is someone that I think will go in the top 3. I currently have him 3, but the reason he's difficult, and it's not a straightforward, like shoe in, this guy's been awesome. We talked about him and Flag as 1 and 2 to start the year. The reason it's difficult is because of the way he profiles compared to guys that have come before him. And then you watch him play, and there's such a disparity from when he's good to when he's bad. Like, he's got a Jekyll and Hyde that is as disparate as anyone else in the draft, because when he's good, he's great. When he's bad, he's non-existent. So that brings me to the point about floor versus ceiling, right? So floor, we talk about a prospect with a high floor, and typically it's someone that's productive, and you can expect a productivity level that's just a standard for them in the NBA. And typically, when you evaluate these guys, is something that they're very good in college and they're very consistent. So my thing about Ace Bailey and where I think his floor versus ceiling is totally different when it goes to the NBA is, I think if you were to max him out in the 100th percentile, he turns into the best player in this draft if everyone hit their absolute 100th percentile, because he is the most gifted scorer. And what's the most important thing in basketball right now? It's being able to create your own shot and score. If he hits his absolute ceiling, he might be the best player in this draft, and he might be the best player outside of Victor Wembanyama from prior drafts. The question is, how does he do so in the NBA? And that's where we reach the floor, because when he doesn't score in the college level, he disappears, and that concerns me greatly.
Yeah, it's been an experience with Ace Bailey. I mean, when he's hot, there's probably, at least in my opinion, not a more fun player to watch when he's hot. And I've said it in past episodes, the rim looks like the size of an ocean when he has it going. But when he's cold, you have some nights where it just doesn't look like he can make a shot, and then it kind of magnifies the concerns about his shot selection and his flaws. I think he's a number 3 pick. I've mentioned it over and over again. And when you talk about the hot and the cold, I'll give yesterday's game a pass. I felt like something was wrong. He played 24 minutes and he only had 4 points against Maryland. I knew he was sick well, I shouldn't say that. I saw him get his shot blocked by Derek Queen. And one of the things that I like about Ace is that people have not been able to contest his shot. I've seen Derek Queen get a block, and I saw Cohen Carr get a block. But other than that, it just seems like people have not been able to contest, and his ability to stop and pop and shoot over the top of guys is what makes him such an intriguing prospect. But in the Maryland game, only took 4 shots, was 2 of 4 from the floor. Prior to the Maryland game against Illinois, he had a solid performance, 7 of 13 from the floor, 18 points, 11 rebounds, 3 blocks, two assists. I say that's a solid performance. It's kind of close to his average as far as the scoring, but that was more so of in the middle. And I feel like he hasn't had a lot of games in the middle. His average is really because he has games like against Northwestern, where he had 37 points on 13 of 20. Against Penn State, he had 30 points on 13 of 15 shooting. He had a 39-point game against Indiana, where he was 16 of 29. But then you look at the stats. 4 for 17 against Michigan, 3 for 16 against Wisconsin, 5 for 15 against Purdue, 4 of 12 against Notre Dame. Like, he has some hot and cold nights. Big contrast.
The scary part about the cold is those are the same shots that he shoots when he's hot. And I think you can spin it either way. But the part that concerns me about the cold is the ones – I would say it this way, actually. I'm going to back up. The part that concerns me when he is cold is in some of those games, he has been the second option and has been cold against collegiate teams, which don't have the athleticism, don't have the length. And the primary focus for the other team has been stopping Dylan Harper. So he's been given assisted shots. And if he misses those, so be it. Like, he's a really good shooter. He's talented, but like, that's unfortunate. But then he still doesn't create off the advantages created for him. And then he takes the same shots as when he's hot and he's the number 1 player on his team when Dylan Harper missed time and he scores against Northwestern, against Indiana, and he knocks down these crazy shots. But it still felt, wow, that's unguardable, while simultaneously saying, wow, like, I'm not sure that's a great shot. I watched a video recently, and it was Kevin Durant commented on a post saying, like, man, this guy's 101. He's filthy. All these compliments to Kevin Durant. He goes, those are bad shots. And he was he was saying, look, like, I'm good, but those are bad shots. I probably shouldn't have taken them. That's how it feels every time I watch Ace Bailey. And when he makes them, it's amazing. But what concerns me is when he's taking those same bad shots, when he has the guy like Dylan Harper, who takes so much attention of the defense, and he's now the second option, and he's shooting these same shots and not getting advantages. He's hitting tough shot after tough shot. The only offensive rebounds have been the only easy shots he's gotten, like a rare run out. But a lot of it's like jab step over the top 3, 1 dribble, highly contested jump shot, swoosh. And then if he misses them, they're like, wow, it's a terrible shot. When he makes them, you say, wow, it's that the talent's unbelievable. But the concern and why he's a difficult experience, or he's a whole experience and he's difficult to evaluate, is how much stock do you want to say, like, this guy is who we want to put the faith of our franchise in a draft that has stars, Cooper Flagg, Dylan Harper, perhaps more, Kasparas Jakucionis, all these guys. How much stock and how much faith do you have in someone who's so reliant on difficult shots, particularly when he's got someone in his own team that maybe draws more attention than he does from an opposing scouting report?
Well, which team would draft him and say that they're going to put their faith of their franchise in him? I don't see a team. Like, if he's at Washington, if they get the 3rd pick, let's say he goes number 3, I don't think Washington is going to say, hey, it all depends on you. New Orleans, I don't think so, unless they completely clear the decks. Utah,
I think they'd be saying, look, like, that's the guy that we hope's our star. I don't think you're putting complete faith in him, but at the same time, if Utah were to get number 1, they'd be putting complete faith in Cooper Flagg. So this is the guy that we're talking about as 1 through 3 in the entire season. So I do think it matters to say that these top 3 teams are looking for someone to change their franchise.
I think change, but I mean, like, if you look at Charlotte, they have their guy, right? And you can say they have their guy 1A and 1B. If you look at Toronto, they already have Scotty Barnes. They have their guy. Brooklyn, the deck is clear. The Thunder have a lottery pick, which is the Sixers. No.
But the three worst teams right now, like if you look at the Wizards, I love Bub Carrington as much as anyone. That's not the guy. Sarr's not the guy. Like you'd hope if you were drafting three that you find your best player. You may not believe it with your whole heart, and that's why I'm concerned. Because my philosophy, ever since we've been doing this, I told you this about Banchero versus Jabari Smith. Jabari Smith's a player that can start on a team, but he's not the face of your franchise. When you're drafting in the top three, you should be looking for a franchise-altering talent. Some people will believe Ace Bailey is because of his shot making, but I don't have that much faith that he can change the course of my franchise's trajectory with his 75th percentile outcome. Like he has to hit 100 for me to really believe. And that's why I have a difficult time evaluating him, because that's my philosophy. You got to swing for the fences when you're drafting the top three. And that's where he is. Like I have a number three, but I don't think he's as safe as you'd be led to believe based on the averages and his age. That said, I do think he can become more athletic, and that could help him create. And I think there is some defensive upside as a secondary rim protector. But the shot selection is scary.
All right. Second segment, I'm going to share my thoughts on why I think he's actually pretty safe. And then we're also going to get into some archetypes. And we're going to hear Leif's thoughts on some players that may be comparable. Stay tuned. Running a small business means that you are wearing a lot of hats, and your personal phone becomes your business phone. And before you know it, you are juggling customer calls all day and all night. And as your team grows, it becomes impossible to manage everything with just one phone number or your personal number. And that is where Open Phone comes in. It is the number one business phone system that is designed to help you keep your work and your personal life separate. For just $15 a month, that's just a few coffees, you can get complete transparency and visibility into everything happening with your business phone number. Open Phone works through an app on your phone or your computer, and it integrates the tools like HubSpot and hundreds of others. It also uses AI-powered call transcripts and summaries, so you have a rundown of your calls and action items the second you hang up. And if you miss a call, no problem. Automated messages are sent directly to your customer, ensuring you never miss an opportunity to engage. And right now, Open Phone is offering 20% off your first 6 months when you go to openphone.com/lockedonnba. That's openphone.com/lockedonnba for 20% off for 6 months. Openphone.com/lockedonnba. And if you have existing numbers with another service, Open Phone will port them over at no extra cost. All right, second segment. So here's my thing about Ace. I actually think he's pretty safe because I think that the shot selection can be toned down. I think if he goes to a team with a playmaker, he is going to be able to get open looks, and he can knock down corner threes. He can also attack a closeout. Maybe not attack a closeout, get all the way to the rim consistently, but he can attack a closeout, shoot the one dribble, pull up, and knock down that shot. I've seen Kevin Durant make that shot over and over and over again. I think once Ace gets stronger, it is going to open things up for his game. I've seen him try to post up in the mid post. And even earlier in the year, like at the very beginning of the season, he was not able to get any kind of mid-post position. But in the last few games since conference play, I have seen him be able to at least establish somewhat decent position in the mid-post where he can shoot over the top of guys. The handle, I think the handle is not as bad as people make it out to be. I think that for him, it's more so about his angles, because when he was on the high school level, he probably just shot over the top of guys, took a lot of, jumpers. But I think that he can handle the ball. Again, we're talking about a guy that's 6'10". So 10 years ago, if you saw Ace Bailey handle the ball 15 years ago at 6'10", you'd be like, man, he can handle. That just shows you how much the game has changed. But I think that for him, once he learns better angles, and I think better angles and added strength will allow him to be able to become a three-level scorer. Because right now, when he's looking to put the ball on the floor, you can bump him off his spots. And then once he's bumped off his spots, at least he does have a counter, which is shoot over the top of guys. So I'm not too concerned, but I do think at the minimum he could be Michael Porter Jr. At the
No,
minimum.
see, I agree with you in terms of he's safe in terms of being a good player in the NBA. Like the skill set and height are very hard to lead you astray and say, oh, that guy's not going to be good. But in a draft in which you're seeing Cooper Flagg, who I believe is of college prospects, so this excludes Wembanyama, the best prospect since Anthony Davis. So you have a guy like Cooper Flagg there. You have a guy in Dylan Harper who, you could make an argument. I don't think he will go one, but you can make an argument that his season has been on a similar caliber when he was healthy and could be a number one. And so you're saying, okay, like, yeah, I like this guy because he has a pathway to being a guy who's really good and can contend, but he's the third option on his own team. And that's what scares me if you're drafting number 3. It's not that I don't think he can be good. It's not that his floor is not high. It is, but it's not superstar caliber material. So that's where I'll get into the archetypes. Brandon Miller, Michael Porter Jr., Brandon Ingram, guys like that. Guys that are good shooters, supremely coordinated for the height and length, but they don't necessarily have the innate athleticism to make them superstars in the NBA. And so I think if you look at the archetype, every one of those guys has at some point in their career been compared to Kevin Durant, and Kevin Durant's one of one. And so if you look at all those guys, none of them have developed to being the number one option on their team. And that concerns me greatly for my philosophy of drafting at the top. So when you talk about a top 3 pick in a draft where we've talked about, I think we did an episode this summer, we said, how many All-Stars can there be? And maybe it was James and I. We talked about how many All-Stars could be in this draft. I believe it was James and I on second thought. And we said up to 7. So Brandon Miller, I don't know if he'll be an All-Star. And I was as high as anyone coming into that year about Brandon Miller. Brandon Ingram, I believe, has been an All-Star, but now he's an unwanted player because of his contract. Michael Porter Jr. has never been an All-Star. So I do have slight concerns if he's not hitting the 100th percentile about how well he can elevate your franchise and make you better. Because there's a reason that some of these teams that are drafting where they are because they don't have that superstar. Like, for instance, I don't think he reminds me of Lauri Markkanen, but I'll just say from someone I see daily, Lauri Markkanen, really good player, and he's been an all-star. But Lauri Markkanen is not someone who can put the ball on the floor and create for himself. Ace Bailey can. Ace Bailey's got more of that wiggle to his game than Lauri Markkanen. But the reason Lauri Markkanen is not going to be a number one option is that deficiency. And I would say Lauri Markkanen's a better athlete than Ace Bailey. He's just less fluid with the ball in his hands. So I think there is a little bit of a lowered potential if he doesn't add some of that athleticism you spoke of, because that's the swing skill, right? Like if he can grow into his body, because he still looks immature as an 18-year-old. I know so much was made as Cooper is 17, now he's 18, but his body looks close to developed, whereas Ace Bailey looks like a high schooler.
Yep. So I disagree. I think Brandon Miller is going to develop into an all-star. I mean, it's year 2. He averaged 21 a game this year, 21, 5, and 3.6 assists. And he got off to a very, very rough start. So I think Brandon Miller is going to be an all-star. As a rookie, he shot 37% from 3 on 6 attempts per game. And Ingram, if he were healthy, if he were consistently healthy, I think that he'd have more all-star appearances. We've seen Brandon Ingram play point forward for New Orleans at times when they didn't have any depth at the lead guard spot. And I think if he's one of those guys, then that's worth it. And then if you don't think that he could be an all-star at 3, then my question is, who behind him in this draft do you take over him and say, I think this guy has a higher chance of being an all-star?
And see, that's where I think I'm playing a little bit of devil's advocate, because I believe that he does have the ceiling to be an all-star. Like, I've made the argument that if they both hit their 100% outcomes, Tracy McGrady is better than Scottie Pippen in terms of building your franchise. And I think Ace compares to Tracy and Cooper Flagg to Scottie Pippen. I'm not saying they're 1-to-1. So I do think he absolutely has that upside. But I'm saying if he doesn't attain that, I am a little more nervous, because most of these guys that you say, oh, they're stars, even the ones that you say, oh, he doesn't have like top tier athleticism, he doesn't have the best shooting, maybe it takes a year or two longer. Like an example would be Cade Cunningham. He wasn't regarded as a tier 1 can't miss prospect, But right now, he's having an unbelievably good season. I don't see that kind of second level if he doesn't hit comfort in being a star. I see a good basketball player in more of the realm of Michael Porter Jr. than I do a guy like Brandon Ingram, who's a point forward, because Ace Bailey doesn't pass.
I thought Cade was a tier 1 guy.
I liked Cade too. I think that's the general consensus. But my point being is there was some safety to Cade Cunningham, and I think there's a lack of safety to Ace Bailey, which makes him an interesting evaluation because, I mean, when he's on, there's no one better. So he scored 37 on 13 and 20 against Northwestern, and the shots he was taking were unbelievable, like NBA level shots. And then he turns around and has a game where he like you mentioned, a couple of those inefficient games. They're the exact same shots. It's just how often you can make those, and that those shots are only taken in a shot diet in the end of games and in the playoffs where the game gets crunched up in the NBA. And yes, that means maybe it'll be more open for him. He'll get some of those one dribbles you referenced about KD, but it is a scary investment. And that's why I think there's a little bit of uncertainty. And that's why we're having this episode. It's not that I don't think he's good. I think he's great. Like, this is a great draft. He's in the top 4 for sure. I think 3, but it's scary to put your franchise the way I view drafting. If you're drafting in the top 3 and it's not some wild lottery fluky thing like the Hawks getting up to 1 from 14, you're meant to be bad. You need a star. And if he's not the star, then it's considered a disappointment. Whether that's fair or not, that's the way the evaluation becomes in 5-7 years from when the draft happens.
See, I think he's safe because he can shoot the ball. Now, if he were a guy that was just like a crazy athlete, and we've seen guys that are crazy athletes go high with shooting concerns, then I would be a little bit more cautious. But I think for him, at the very minimum, he's going to be a spot-up shooter. But also, I just think that I think that with everything, like all the concerns and the pause, if I'm not mistaken, he's leading all the freshmen in scoring. We're still talking about a guy that's averaging like 19 points a game. He's still efficient. And yes, you can say he's efficient or inefficient or whatever, just because, he's had some very, very hot games that kind of balance things out. But we're talking about 19.4 points, 7.7 rebounds, 1.4 blocks per game, and he's shooting 38% from 3 on a good volume of attempts. To me, I don't understand why he's so polarizing and so divisive.
See, I think the divisiveness for me in terms of my evaluation is essentially, if he reaches what I think the ceiling is, he's unbelievable. And I think the floor is safe. Like, you would never say he's got a low floor. And I completely agree that his floor, because he can shoot the ball, especially the way he hits tough shots, which is something I like usually. We talked about this with Banchero, and we talked about this with Brandon Miller. Yeah, maybe he doesn't have elite twitch, doesn't have elite this, but man, he's a tough shot maker and tough shot taker. Like, I compared from the first time I saw Brandon Miller to Paul George. And that was like, it turned out it was his favorite player. I had no idea. That was from when I first saw him in high school. Ace Bailey's got that and maybe more, and that's great. But when you're compared with the Cooper Flaggs and Dylan Harpers that I think have safer pathways to stardom, that's why I think it's a little bit of a difficult evaluation, because there's a world where people talked about him being ahead of Cooper, ahead of Dylan Harper. And so I don't think it's a knock to be considered a top 3 prospect. But when you come in with the hype of saying this is the next Paul George, the next Tracy McGrady, it makes it difficult when you're not creating easy shots against collegiate competition, especially when you have someone on your own team that's also going in the top 3. So I am not knocking his floor. I think he'll be a good NBA player. I think he's got a tremendous ceiling. I just think that when you compare him to some of the other prospects in this class, there's a little bit more of a risk involved with saying, here are the keys to my franchise. And maybe that's where your draft evaluation process is tested, because to me, there's a lot of teams that would say, look, we need to get a star. Like, here's your chance. And I don't think he necessarily is a safe bet to be a star in a class that I believe has stars.
All right, up next, we're going to dig a little bit deeper on that. And then we're going to talk about the shot creation and the swing skill and what happens if he puts it all together. All right, last segment. So this is where I kind of disagree. I mean, I feel like, yes, you would love to have the keys to your franchise with your pick. But realistically, the guy is going to be 18 years old on draft day. And how many 18-year-olds were ready to take the keys to the franchise and actually be successful? I mean, the list is very, very, very slim. I think if he goes to Charlotte, he's in a position to where he doesn't have to have the keys to the franchise right now. I think eventually Charlotte is going to move off of LaMelo. I think if he goes to Brooklyn, giving him the keys to the franchise, I don't think that puts him in the best position to succeed unless you put some veterans or some help around him. If he goes to Utah, he doesn't have to have the keys to the franchise. He can play off Lauri Markkanen and who they have, and then slowly develop on his own timeline. And so I think like it's extremely rare. One out of every how many drafts do you get a guy that you're ready to give your keys to at 18 years old? And he can turn it around and make you at least a competitive team in year 2 or 3. I mean, Victor, as good as Victor is, the Spurs are still below 500 in year 2.
That speaks to the Western Conference, though. If Victor was in the East, they'd be the 5 seed. Like he's completely transformed the Spurs. The Spurs are in win now mode because he's unbelievable.
Which they got a good deal for Fox, but to me, I feel like if a guy is too good too early, then he puts his team in position to overpay for veterans because you don't have the luxury of adding a few more lottery picks. So you look at LeBron in Cleveland, he was too good too early. Who are the lottery picks after that? You look at Luka, and when he was in Dallas, they were too good too early. Then they had to like fall back and tank at the end of the season so they can get the lively pick. If they don't get the lively pick, then I don't think they go to the finals last year. And so for San Antonio, luckily they probably won't make the playoffs, and they still have the Hawks pick. So I don't know if you want a guy to be really, really great, too good, because now you're going to start, like I said, overpaying for veterans.
Those are first world problems. I would take it in a heartbeat.
I'll tell you, look at the Thunder situation. Though. Remember, Gilgeous-Alexander, even when he went to OKC, they were able to take their time, and they had a bunch of picks. But it wasn't like, I think this first year when he was with Chris Paul, I think they went to the playoffs. But then they had some years where they were able to add Chet. They were able to add Jalen Williams. And so if he comes out and he's like leading them to the playoffs in the first 2 or 3 years and they don't have all those picks, they're not in the same situation that they're in.
No, I agree with that, but I don't think you can complain about having someone that you know is your franchise because he's that great that he leads you from being in the dumps with the top 3 pick to having a chance at the playoffs that quickly. That means you did your job, you got your guy, and now you have to do another job of building around him. Like Wembanyama, yeah, they might miss the playoffs in year 2, but they were terrible, and I mean terrible the year before. And now they have De'Aaron Fox, they have Stephon Castle, all these guys, and they've done well, but it's only possible because Wembanyama is that special. So back to the Ace Bailey thing. What can make him that special and make him the star that allows you to build and have those first world problems of if he's good enough to lead you to franchise or if he's too good and it keeps you out of the lottery? I think his shot creation and athleticism goes hand in hand in terms of if he can create a shot diet, attacking closeouts, and an isolation that makes him more able to put pressure on the rim, shoot free throws, attack closeouts and do one dribble pull-ups instead of these just jab step ones. And I think it goes hand in hand with how his body matures and how he can physically get stronger to not get bumped off his spot. That's huge. And then another skill that's underrated, and you mentioned it, he has 1.4 blocks per game. I think he's an excellent weak side rim protector, secondary rim protector, and that helps him in terms of being useful on the other side. It's not like the ceiling, but I think it rounds him as a basketball player. So, yes, I'm nitpicking because of the top 3 guy. Like, there are plenty of guys we could say, oh, I don't know if I'd have him lottery, and that would be a more interesting discussion in terms of, oh, like, this is difficult to evaluate because he has this very blatant swing skill. But at the top of the draft, these are the real decisions that the top teams in the draft need to make, and they mortgage their franchise. There are managers that lose their job after choosing Ace Bailey, and I'm not saying it'll be because of him, but like a player in similar context from years past has lost managers the job. So I think there's a real world in which these discussions come up about, do we trust him enough, or do we trust other players? And is there this comfort level with Ace Bailey being such a polarizing prospect in terms of, if he's Tracy McGrady and he reaches an absolute ceiling where he's the ultimate shot creator, he's got the wiggle, he's got the height, the coordination, then we look like geniuses. But if he's not, and you take him over a guy like Jakucionis, for instance, and Jakucionis turns into I'll just say, for lack of a better example, a poor man's Luka Doncic, in terms of he can create for others as a pick and roll savant, and he's better. It looks pretty bad down the road. So I do think he's in the number 3 prospect, and I wouldn't take Jakucionis above him, but I do think it's not as safe of a proposition in terms of, in this draft, they're really good, and there's a lot of stars. Therefore, picking a number 3 that feels safe doesn't feel as safe.
I have 2 questions for you. All right. For context purposes, why is it never mentioned that Rutgers, they started 4 freshmen? Could Ace Bailey's, yes, some of the shots are just who he is, but could some of those tough shots be reduced if he were not playing on a young team? We all know college basketball is a lot older, but if he were playing on a team that had more veterans and more playmakers.
Perhaps. Rutgers is devoid of talent aside from the 2, but we have what we have in terms of the evaluation, and his shot chart hasn't changed when he does play alongside arguably the best point guard in the country in Harper, and it's the exact same when he plays without him. So I'm not sure. I do think he could look better, maybe slightly more efficient if he were not taking all of them, but I'm not sure he wouldn't, considering he takes the exact same shots when he plays alongside the best point guard in college basketball.
Well, I do think that Rutgers could get him more involved in some pick and pops with Harper. I think that that's something that they could do. And another question, and speaking of Jakucionis, he was one of my biggest evals that is tough. And he relies on a heavy diet of tough shots. And I don't think that is always talked about. With Jakucionis, he doesn't have the foot speed to consistently put pressure on the rim. He's very turnover prone, but when you look at his best games, it's because he's making the crossover step back 3. And that's pretty much his shot diet, is the crossover step back 3. But he doesn't get the same knock for his shot selection and his inefficiencies.
I think it's because he came in with lower expectation. And then the second part of it is he's a point guard and he passes the ball. Ace Bailey doesn't pass.
Well, he passes the ball, but he turns the ball over. 3.7 turnovers per game. That's what the numbers were coming into this week. And I don't know what they were after this last game. But to me, he is a more difficult eval than Ace Bailey, because I figure if you're 6'10 and you can shoot and you can provide weak side shot blocking, there's a spot for you on every team in the league. My question with Jakucionis is, and I can turn this into another episode, is how good can you be if you're a point guard, but you turn the ball over at a very high rate and you can't consistently get 2 feet in the paint? And you have a heavy diet of contested step back 3s. When he's on, it looks great. And I've seen him live. I've seen him actually absolutely dominate a game, and the shot was falling. But I've also seen times where he's really struggled if the shot isn't falling, because yes, he gets to the foul line somehow due to craft, but he's in today's NBA, you want your guy to be able to get 2 feet in the paint consistently. And I don't think he can consistently get 2 feet in the paint.
I would agree that I don't think he's a great paint attacker, but yeah, he shoots more free throws than Ace Bailey does. Ace Bailey doesn't touch the paint either at 6'10". And I'm not saying he's better. In fact, I have Ace ahead of him because I agree that his floor is higher. I do think that Ace Bailey, the reason it's easy to knock him is because he's on a bad team. He's got one really good player next to him in Harper, and his shot selection stays the same. Whereas Jakucionis, I think, is given the green light or just kind of a pass because he had lower expectations than Ace Bailey coming into the season. And then when he makes these passes, it's like, oh, there's going to be better spacing in the NBA. There's going to be better spacing. Therefore, in the pick and roll, he can get it deeper in the paint. And yet he still shoots near 6 free throws per game because he's got that guile. He's got that cleverness. And maybe you just refine his passing. Like, when they say, oh, the quarterback can make every throw, he's just got to make his decision-making a little bit better. And then you have a conservative offensive coordinator and this guy looks really good. I think that's possible with Jakucionis. Whereas Bailey, it's if his athleticism comes around and all that shot making is put into a steady diet of, look, I can get to the rim and dunk on you and shoot this, then he's an absolute monster. I'm not debating that whatsoever. I just think that there's more of a skepticism about his athleticism turning around, whereas Jakucionis has defined his game around the lack of athleticism already.
And wrapping up on this, I remember a couple of years ago, there were some concerns about Brandon Miller's athleticism. And I think he's fared totally fine in the NBA. And he's made way more athletic plays in the NBA than we saw in his 1 year at Alabama. Well, that wraps up this episode of the Locked On NBA Big Board Podcast. Let us know your thoughts. It was good to have Leif on and bring another opinion. But let us know your thoughts. Is Ace Bailey a difficult eval for you? To me, no. 6'10", can shoot the ball, but Leif made some valid points. So again, let us know how you feel. Once again, thank you for making this your first listen of the day. It's Rafael and Leif, and we are out of here.